There are men who begin their lives in light, but end in shadow. And Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, was one of them. He rose to the throne in glory, with the promise of peace and a heart full of devotion. God had granted him what no other man possessed, wisdom beyond measure. In his early days, Solomon walked closely with the Lord. He built the temple in Jerusalem, a house so magnificent that the people wept when they saw it. He prayed, he sang, he judged with fairness, and the whole world marveled at him. Kings and queens traveled from distant lands just to hear the words that flowed from his lips. And for a time, Israel knew peace. But wisdom, as Solomon learned, carries a heavy weight. It isolates a man. When you understand too much, when you see too deeply into the hearts of others, you begin to feel the loneliness that no crown can ease. Perhaps that is where it began, not in rebellion, but in quiet distance, a drift so small it was barely seen. He still prayed. He still spoke of God, but the fire that once burned bright began to dim. As his kingdom expanded, so did his desires. Wealth poured into Jerusalem like rivers of gold. Ships from Tarshish arrived laden with treasures, and Solomon, once humble, began to believe that he truly was the wisest of all men. He built palaces, gardens, and pools that reflected the light of the sun. He filled his courts with singers, servants, and wives, 700 queens, 300 concubines, alliances sealed by beauty and power. And through it all, his heart slowly wandered. The man who once prayed for wisdom to rule justly now sought pleasure to fill the silence. He collected idols, not out of faith, but curiosity. He listened to voices from foreign gods, not out of devotion, but boredom. And perhaps, somewhere in the quiet of his golden chambers, he realized what he had lost. The presence that once filled his soul, that burning nearness of God, was now only a memory. For wisdom without obedience becomes pride. And pride, when left unguarded, becomes a wall, one that even a king cannot climb. There was no kingdom like Solomon's, none. Silver was as common as stone. Gold gleamed on every wall, every cup, every corner of his palace. People spoke his name with awe, even fear. And yet, behind the walls of cedar and gold, the heart of the great king began to tremble. Because when everything shines too brightly, the soul starts to fade. He told himself he was building for God, a kingdom that would honor the Lord forever. But deep inside, something shifted. The temple was complete. The prayers were said. And Solomon began to wonder, what now? He turned to knowledge, to art, to music. He studied the stars and the beasts of the field. He gathered wise men from distant lands to speak of mysteries. His mind was a fire that never slept. But the more he learned, the emptier he felt. Because wisdom can fill the mind, but it cannot feed the heart. He wrote, I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a chasing after the wind. Those words would come later, when regret had settled like dust on his soul. But even now, as his fame grew, the first cracks had already formed. Each alliance brought him a new queen, each queen a new god. And though he told himself it was politics, not worship, he let the altars rise. A shrine here, an offering there, just symbols, he thought. Harmless. But the Lord who had appeared to him twice, the same God who once called him beloved, was watching. And the voice that once spoke in dreams grew silent. At night, the great king would stand on the balcony of his palace, looking over the city that bore his name. He saw the temple's golden roof shining under the moonlight. He saw the torches flicker in the courtyards. And for a moment, he remembered the day he dedicated it all to God, how the cloud of glory had filled the sanctuary, how the people had fallen on their knees in awe. But those days were gone. Now the only sound was the wind, whispering through the halls of a man who had everything, yet felt nothing. Solomon had built the greatest kingdom the world had ever seen. But somewhere along the way, the king who once knelt before God no longer knew how. It did not happen in a single day. Sin never does. It begins with a thought, a small compromise that whispers, "It's only this once," then another, and another, until even a wise man cannot hear the difference between truth and comfort. Solomon's heart began to turn, softly at first, like a leaf caught in a quiet wind. His foreign wives, princesses of nations God had warned against, spoke sweetly of their gods. Ashtaroth, goddess of fertility; Chemosh, god of war; Molech, god of fire. Names that should have burned his ears, yet they began to sound familiar. He smiled, nodded, and allowed them their shrines. A hilltop here, a grove there. He told himself, "It keeps the peace." He said, "It honors our alliances." But deep down, something sacred was dying. The man who once built a house for the Lord now built altars for idols. He had prayed for discernment, to know good from evil, and yet he began to call evil necessary. The prophet's voice came like thunder one morning. It echoed through the marble halls. "Thus says the Lord, you have not kept my covenant. You have followed other gods. I will tear the kingdom from your hand." Solomon froze. He remembered the dream at Gibeon, when God had offered him anything, and he chose wisdom. He remembered the day the Lord filled the temple with his glory. He remembered what it felt like to be close to God. But the voice of the Lord was gone, and in its place, silence. He began to see rebellion rise among his own officials. Men he trusted whispered behind his back. Jeroboam, once a loyal servant, had begun to gather followers. Enemies grew stronger. Borders trembled. Still, Solomon refused to bow. Pride hardened his heart like stone. He told himself he could fix it, with wealth, with power, with more control. But the more he grasped, the more everything slipped through his hands. He walked through his golden halls, but they no longer felt like home. The idols stood in corners, silent and heavy. The laughter of his wives echoed like ghosts. And at night, the king lay awake, haunted by a truth he could no longer escape. He had known God once, and now he did not know himself. There are few things more terrifying than silence, especially when it comes from heaven. For years, Solomon had heard the voice of God. It had come to him in dreams, in whispers, in the quiet assurance that guided his hand. But now, there was nothing. No dream, no word, only the sound of his own heartbeat in the night. He walked through the temple, the same holy place that once glowed with God's presence, and it felt empty. The priests still sang, the incense still rose, but the glory was gone. Solomon stood where the ark rested, the place no man dared enter carelessly. He waited, as he had done so many times before, for the Spirit to meet him there, but the air was still. And in that stillness, Solomon realized God had turned away. He had become the man he once feared to be. the wise king who knew every answer, except how to return. His advisors spoke of rebellions growing in the north. His wives demanded more shrines, more offerings. His people murmured of taxes, of labor, of a king who no longer prayed. But none of it reached him. He sat upon his throne, staring into the distance, seeing not his kingdom, but the emptiness behind it. Each night, the torches burned low. Each morning, the sun rose over Jerusalem, and still, no word came from heaven. He began to write again, not decrees or judgments, but thoughts, questions, confessions. I have seen all that is done under the sun, he wrote, and behold, all is vanity and a chasing after the wind. Those were not the words of a philosopher. They were the cries of a broken man. Solomon was learning what every heart must one day learn, that wisdom without obedience leads only to sorrow, that knowledge without reverence leads to ruin. He had sought to understand everything, and in doing so, he had lost the one thing that mattered, the fear of the Lord. Now, even his own thoughts turned against him. Memories of his father David, the man who danced before the ark, who wept before God, haunted him. David had sinned too, but he had repented. Solomon had sinned and reasoned, and reason cannot heal a soul. In the silence of God, the wisest man on earth finally understood what it meant to be foolish. The years crept upon Solomon quietly. No army could fight them. No wisdom could delay them. One morning, he looked into the polished bronze mirror and did not recognize the man staring back. His hair had turned white. His eyes, once bright with vision, were dimmed by memory. And his heart, it carried the weight of things undone. He still sat upon his throne, but the room no longer felt alive. The laughter of servants, the music of harps, all sounded distant, like echoes of another world. He had built palaces, ships, gardens, cities, but the silence of God had built something else inside him, a hollow space where joy used to live. Sometimes he wandered through the gardens he had designed, gardens so vast that visitors lost their way. He would pause by the fountains and whisper to himself, I built all this, and yet I cannot build peace. The wisdom that once drew nations now turned against him. He saw the vanity in every triumph. He saw how gold tarnished, how beauty faded, how pleasure withered in the morning sun. And he saw, with brutal clarity, how his heart had chased everything except the one who gave it life. He remembered the day he first took the throne. David's final words still lingered in his mind. Walk in his ways, and you shall prosper. Solomon had believed those words. He had even lived them for a time. But somewhere between the temples of gold and the women of foreign lands, he had lost his way. Now, at the edge of his days, he understood what no teacher had ever told him. Regret is not loud. It whispers. It follows you into the night, sits beside your bed, and breathes the same question again and again. What if you had turned back sooner? Solomon looked out over Jerusalem, the city he had built for God's name. He watched the smoke of morning offerings rise into the sky, and for the first time in years, his eyes filled with tears. He whispered a prayer, not for wisdom, not for power, but for mercy. God of my father David, he said softly, if you still listen to me, remember me not for what I have built, but for what I have broken. The words trembled in the air, fragile and human. And though the heavens did not answer, Solomon felt something stir, a peace, faint but real, like the first breath after a long storm. He did not know if it was forgiveness, but he knew this: God was still there, and that was enough. And that, in his final days, Solomon no longer sought to teach others. He simply wanted to understand himself. The palace was quiet now. No foreign envoys came to marvel at his glory. No music filled the halls. Only the faint sound of wind passing through cedar pillars. A gentle reminder that even the strongest trees must bend to time. He spent his mornings by the window, writing. Not as a king, but as a man. Each word was a confession, each line a bridge between who he was and who he had become. The words of the teacher, he wrote, son of David, king in Jerusalem.
Meaningless state.
Meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. But this time, the words did not carry bitterness. They carried truth. He finally understood that wisdom was never meant to glorify the one who possessed it. It was meant to point back to the one who gives it. He wrote of toil, of pleasure, of laughter and sorrow, of seasons under the sun. He spoke of how men chase after dreams that fade, how they build towers that crumble, and how they forget the simple joy of fearing God. His servants sometimes found him asleep over his scrolls, a faint smile on his face, as if he had made peace with what once tormented him. At night, when the lamps were low, Solomon would gaze at the stars, the same stars he had studied in his youth, the same constellations that had shone over his father's battlefield prayers. He no longer asked the heavens for answers. He simply admired their faithfulness. He had spent his life seeking meaning under the sun. Now, he understood. True meaning comes from above it. One evening, as his strength began to fade, he whispered to the scribe beside him, "Write this last line." The scribe waited, quill trembling in the candlelight. Solomon drew a breath and said, "Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man." Then he closed his eyes. The wisest man who ever lived did not die surrounded by gold or praise, but by peace. And though his kingdom would one day fall, his words endured. They became a mirror for all who chase after the wind, a reminder that power fades, glory dies, but reverence endures forever. Some say the heavens were silent that night, but perhaps, just perhaps, the silence was not absence, but approval